Hey guys, what's going on? Another episode of VanGo After Dark. Chris is absent, so I'm taking his place this time.
How you guys doing? Sadiq here. Good to see everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We've got some really interesting content up on the deck today. But before we begin...
So for a lot of you guys who have been vaping Frozen for the past year, it's on 15% off. Get your hands on some. Re-up if you need.
Frozen Ophelia is a good one actually because it originally started with the OG Cactus Jango. It turned into Ophelia, and then as summer was coming in, of course we had so many requests for a frozen version, and so I had this flavor in mind, but it took so long to be able to tweak Ophelia and turn it into Frozen Ophelia. So anyways, that's the little backstory, but we have a lot of good stuff today. We've been looking into some interesting issues, and tobacco, the rise of tobacco, and the story will actually surprise many of you. It surprised me actually. I knew that there was a lot of craziness that went on, but I didn't know that it went far beyond the last 100 years. This is actually something that's been going on for the last couple hundred years. Why don't you tell us about the slave days?
Yeah, actually tobacco, as much as we try and hate on big tobacco, you know, they are these conglomerates and stuff, but the reality is that tobacco has been a tool used for hundreds of years. Originally, people used tobacco even in South American countries back before even colonization. It was used more as a kind of a ritual substance, and it was kind of kept aside. And then later on, when you come to the 1600s, that's when it really starts coming into play. So as America starts becoming colonized, they need to find industry, they need to find ways to have money out there. So currency, they don't have access to gold mines and stuff like that in the first colonized cities in the Americas. So tobacco grew very well out there. So they used tobacco, and often they used to trade it to the First Nations in use of labor or resources or in food, and so tobacco became a replacement for gold even in those times.
It's really interesting how the scam started so long ago. So basically the colonists, they knew that they could hook the people on to tobacco, and so they started giving out tobacco to all the tribes as well as alcohol. And so with the two of them, they basically controlled and enslaved the people. They became slaves of their addiction, and so slowly they were able to really get in. And so what happened is these tobacco fields that they started creating, they had to supply the demand. And so what they started doing back in the 1600s is importing slaves from Africa just to grow their tobacco. And so they used slaves to grow tobacco to enslave other people, both with trade and of course the addiction. And this went on for a couple hundred years until we get to the more current times. And in late 1800s is when there was a man, James something.
James, it starts with a C.
James, we'll call him James. He was the man in the late 1800s. He invented a machine. And so back in the 1800s, late 1800s, there were a couple companies that were all competing to provide their tobacco. They would grow it, and then they would dry it, and they would get it ready for production, and then they would sell it as tobacco. And so this man, he created a machine that was able to, if I'm not wrong, he was able to push out 200 cigarettes an hour, which at the time was revolutionary. And so with his increased capacity and his increased efficiency, he was able to push out a lot of his competitors. He started dropping his prices, and people couldn't keep up with the prices that he was offering because his efficiency was so high. A lot of the companies started sinking until we get to the early 1900s. And so in about 1911, there was a series of antitrust cases brought up against these different companies. One of them, on a separate note, which we'll touch on in the future, is the American Oil Company. But the bigger one at the time was the tobacco companies. And so what they were claiming was that this one company, the American Tobacco Company, owns and controls more than 80% of the tobacco and the cigarettes that were going into the states. And so at the time they said, this is not allowed, this is not constitutional, we have to split them up. And so after they split them up, they turned into Laurel Lads, they turned into R.J. Reynolds Company, the British American Tobacco. These companies branched off, and over the next 100 years they slowly came back together. And of course the money is the same. You split them up, but it's all controlled by the same people. And so what they've done is over the 100 years is they've just thrown things back and forth between each other. And so around the 1940s, it's quite interesting. It's actually the Nazis. Remember what you were saying?
So the Nazi Germany was actually the first government organization to take a stance against tobacco.
And that's sad that the Nazis were the first ones.
And this is after a time where during the Crimean War, right before World War I, basically the British had a huge issue with, spreading out through all these countries. They used to use tobacco as a way to even incite their soldiers. And on top of that, tobacco usage grew a lot. So now tobacco as a cigarette is a new tool. So they had tobacco in its own form before and people appreciated it in their own way. They had cigars. But when cigarettes came out, it became much more accessible, much more convenient. And in fact, they used to use this on slave plantations and they used to incentivize the slaves. They would
and even prisoners.
Yeah, prisoners as well.
Imagine that. So they would give prisoners and slaves tobacco because they knew that they would control them with the addiction. And so they would use withholding the addiction as an actual punishment. If the slaves got out of line or if the soldiers got out of line, they'd just withhold the cigarettes. And they know that these guys are addicted. They really want it. They would want it more than food and water. And so what's better than that? They've controlled them in a new way. And what's another interesting thing that it wasn't until early 1900s that it started coming out. Cigarette manufacturers weren't even rolling just plain tobacco. They started adding their own shit to it after.
But they didn't find that out until people had to forcibly ask them. People attacked them. They're like, why are we getting all these problems? And in fact, since the 1600s, people were already saying that tobacco caused dizziness, fatigue, because they used it as a medicine. So they used it as a medicine a long time ago. And you know, obviously, of course, living with drugs nowadays, they have their side effects, they have their pros and cons. Use them in moderation and you can get by. But now you're taking all that out, you're adding other chemicals into it, and you're proposing it in a different method. Your intentions are different. When the intention was to help, to cure, maybe tobacco had a place. But tobacco has since lost that place, and it's not a cure anymore. In fact, it forces people to live on their pack a day. It makes them go to work because they need their
Think
pack
of all
a day.
the money that's wasted on cigarettes. How they've controlled the generations and generations with their enslaving of the mind. They've taken this addiction, they've made it consistently worse as the years go on, more addictive, more harmful, until the point where it was so much that finally in 1997 they had the MSA, the Master Service Agreement, where they were supposed to pay to the states. They had come up with a settlement of $250 billion. And the way it worked is it was a step-up program. And so as the years went on, the price that they would receive from the cigarettes would go higher and higher per unit sold. Now, the interesting thing is they also had a couple clauses in there for volume discounts. And so if they did not, let's say in 2010, they didn't hit their projection, they would get a discount on the amount that they had to pay based on how much they actually sold. So they made a settlement in a way. They basically cut them a share of the profits and they said, look, here's your share of the profits, you do what you have to, and we'll continue selling poison to the people, we'll continue enslaving them, and you just let us do what we want. And so after 1997, they knew that, of course, this is not sustainable for them. They need to figure something else out. And so in 2000s, in the early 2000s, is when they started looking into e-cigarettes, because e-cigarettes get them away from that tax. And so in the early 2000s, they started working on and releasing their own e-cigarettes. And so around 2008, 2009 is when we started seeing those come into the market. And this was their answer. In 2011, the amount that they were supposed to pay per cigarette was going to jump. It was jumping, I think, 30 or 40% at that year from their next step up. And so they knew that this is unacceptable, and they have already started their campaigns. And so, for example, Blue e-cigs, Vape, IQOS, all these different ones, they have been campaigning. They knew that this was coming. And so now they've created the vaping industry as their new age form of controlling the masses. And so when the vaping industry as it actually stands, not big tobacco and their scum and their new ways of coming and enslaving the minds, when real vapors came out and we started coming out with our products and we started putting in the raw nicotine, this was a problem. This was taking people away from cigarettes, away from their little ecosystem that they built. And so now you can see they're becoming more and more aggressive into our different industries. They're joining our groups. They're using our resources. They've created so many groups. Back in the days when there was anti-smoking groups, they were all funded by the tobacco companies. And so it's kind of like hypocritical. And the funny thing is, they have to. As part of their settlement agreement, they can use some of the funds towards advocacy against their product. And so instead of giving it to the state, they'll just give it to these advocacy groups. So they don't have a choice. They have to spend that money. They have to make it look like they're doing their part. But in reality, they've been doing this for hundreds of years. The guy that started this back in the 1890s, he eventually took over everything over the next 20 years, and that was the company that turned into R.J. Reynolds, BAT, all the current companies that we see today, all stem from the man, James, who created the magical machine that would whip out cigarettes at an alarming rate back in 1890s. So he figured out a way to mass enslave general population, and every attempt that's been risen up to take them down has been squished for 50 years. It wasn't until 1997. Now, why is it 1997 when we get this MSA, Master Service Agreement? So for years and years before that, no one knew. And they are knowingly going around and poisoning the people. It's because of them that in the 60s and the 70s, you can go smoke cigarettes in hospitals. So you're going there to get cured, but you're dying anyways. And so it was a constant cycle of them killing off people, basically, and enslaving the general public. They can't think about other things. If they run out of their money, they don't get cigarettes. If they run out of their money, they don't get liquor. So, I mean, what is necessary for them to do to help us wake up and realize that they're not out for the best of us? They live and prey off addictions. They're a legal addiction, and some have even said that it's more addictive than heroin. So now we're talking about a substance that's potentially more addictive than heroin, that's fully legal, is one of the leading causes for death annually over the whole world. We have all these mass murderers, we're plagued by terrorists, we're plagued by homicide, we're plagued by all these problems, but what's the number one killer? Tobacco. And it has been for hundreds of years. For hundreds of years, we've allowed tobacco companies to enslave people. We've allowed tobacco farmers to bring slaves from Africa. We've allowed them to come in and trade with the natives of the land and get them hooked on their products. But when are we going to stand up and make a change and say, no, we're not going to accept this? You're making victims. You're getting people hooked and they're stuck for the rest of their life because you're not giving them proper resources to get off. And now they're turning vapes into the next big thing that they want to push.
I was reading and I saw the word Pocahontas in my research. I'm like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. I was like, well, what does this have to do with anything? I'm like, no, it's not the same one. Turns out that Disney movie was based on this First Nations lady who married a man who was already starting tobacco plantations. This guy took her, they went to Britain. They had put a lot of their money there, and he ended up having a kid who became the chief of that First Nations tribe. So by doing this, tobacco implemented itself in the First Nations culture. They literally found a way to get into the culture and put themselves in there as an irreplaceable part. So now they're supported by the chief. Why would you say no? So past all that, in the 1950s, they had the American Medical Journal published. So let's say, we say that, people didn't know that tobacco was bad. In the late 50s, they published an official document, took up thousands of doctors, they had real research. Like you said, why did it take another 40 years for the government to intervene? For 40 years, people would, fight, they would sue, all these things, and now the funny thing is, there's a quote from a General Charles something. So there's General Charles, he was a war veteran, he actually had a big place in the World War II, and after he came back, it's actually not said much about what he did in his business life. But when you go through the tobacco article, you see that he was actually a big player in the American Tobacco Company, and he said that the way that they would win is just that they would run their money dry. And so by this, they just had so much power, they just had to wait everyone out. Waited the 40 years so the government had no choice to intervene, but they've already killed so many people. And
how many people are we going to let them kill? It's complete sham. The fact that the government allows them to do what they're doing, it's very clear in our face that public health is not the concern. The concern is money. And because we live in a system where the politicians have so many scandals and problems, where is all of our money going? When we look at the cost that the cigarette industry puts on the economy, we're not better off by just having cigarettes and taxing them. There's a lot of things that we can't quantify. Opportunity cost. That guy that's in hospital and he's dying at the age of 40, maybe he was supposed to invent cancer medicine when he was 60, but he'll never see that age because he's going to die prematurely because of the poison that we've allowed into our society. Of course, it's going to be hard to get rid of such a deep-rooted poison, but it will take a commitment. But we're not committed. No one is committed to removing big tobacco. Everyone's committed to getting us off cigarettes, yes, but it's fueled by tobacco. They've done this for hundreds of years. They've controlled the masses. At this point, they're not letting go of their product that's controlled the masses. They don't want to pay the MSA, the Master Service Agreement, where they pay the states for what they've done and they pay towards the Medicare, is not happening because they're now switching everyone to e-cigarettes. And e-cigarettes don't have the same regulation. They've gone around. They've made new addicts with their little pods, which are just as bad, not yet, but they will be just as bad as cigarettes. They won't have the tar, they won't have the fire, but you're going to have it full of chemicals to ensure you are addicted. Now we're saying we're allowing these companies who peddle drugs that are more addictive than heroin. How are they still walking around?
Actually, to put it on that, we put another poll up, and it turns out that 85% of people tried tobacco before the age of 18. So you kind of think, the government, they did their thing. They're like, you know what? Put an age restriction. What does that mean? How many of people we even know from our own experiences were actually affected by this implementation? In fact, high schools have a smoke pit. You go out and you sit in the smoke pit. Now you go there, there's vapors, but at the same time, everyone's got, they got their salt nick. It's, we're trying to get out of this, but we haven't found the problem. The problem is that they've created a society of habitual addiction.
And what we need to do at this point is come together and work on ways where we can help people get off their nicotine addiction, not continue their addiction. And that was the motivation for a lot of people in the vaping industry. Now, Big Tobacco has been in this industry for over 10 years. How many efforts have they themselves made to get people off of the nicotine addiction? There's not much efforts on that side. They have a lot of efforts to switch people from their one product to another.
Or to the gum, they move them to the cigarette.
Well, the gum is a scam. The gum is a scam because they know it's not going to get people off. Like, the nicotine is in there, but the chemicals are not there. You need those chemicals that have got you addicted to this toxic mix with nicotine in it. But if you take caffeine and you mix it in with a whole bunch of chemicals and you put it in your coffee, is that allowed? If we start selling coffee that we've got our own proprietary caffeine, where if you drink it, you won't like Starbucks and you won't like Timmy's anymore because our caffeine is proprietary. Now, if we started doing this as a company, how quickly would people band together and say, this is an outrage? What are you talking about? You can't go make proprietary caffeine so people are addicted to your coffee. But this is what the tobacco companies have done. In the early 1800s, there was tobacco. Late 1800s, it was tobacco pre-rolled into tubes for you. Then, in the early 1900s, or whenever they started putting these additional chemicals, because they wanted more addiction. They didn't want it to be a casual thing. They wanted it to be an everyday thing. So they made sure it was in, the chemicals were in. They made sure that they got their products in the hands of influential people. Hollywood, the flappers of the 30s during the Depression. And then on top of that, they would make sure that all the soldiers were always given cigarettes. Why are you giving your soldiers cigarettes? Because you want to ensure that they will come back to you. They need your water, they need your food, and they need your cigarettes. And so they use cigarettes for hundreds of years to control it. They have already done this scam so long ago. They used to give cigarettes to slaves. They used to force them to work in the fields. Why are you giving slaves in the fields cigarettes? Why are you giving prisoners of war cigarettes? You're not being nice to them. You're hooking them. You know you have screwed their life. You're giving them an addiction. That is what it boils down to, And it really is time that people come together and really wake up to this scam, because this scam is costing us a lot more than anyone imagines. First of all, we can look at the real costs. How much money is taken from everyone's pockets, every family, every starving child, and given to a tobacco company? How much of that money is not going to the right spot? How much of that money could be used for better education for that child who would have potentially grown up and helped to contribute to humankind, not grow up and get laced with a billion or a bunch of different addictions that now they're slaves to, that they're going to be good slaves for the rest of their life and work hard and make sure that they feed their addictions and then eventually die from their addictions. They're not contributing to humanity, they're just living. And that's what's happened, is that we've been turned into a slave generation, just like every generation before us.
And it gets worse. So this guy, right, not only is he spending the money, he's spending his time. He's going out for a smoke, let's say 5 times a day, right? So a couple minutes each time. So let's say 5 minutes each time, 5 by 5, 25 minutes right there. His pack runs out. That's another 25 minutes to 30 minutes, He has to go to the gas station, get another pack of smokes. So he's already lost so much opportunity. But he had to go to that gas station. How many people did he not meet because he went to go smoke? And then he comes back and he smells like cigarettes, so the people he wants to meet don't want to hang around with him because he smells bad. And then you go into the thing where it's like first he used tobacco, they had chewing tobacco, and then they moved it all, right? It slowly started changing, and now we're coming to the age where they've given us another form of this nicotine.
So from age 18 all the way to 22, he smoked, and he got up to 3 packs a day. Let's quantify that. We're talking about $45, potentially 40, 35, whatever, a day. Let's say it's in on the low end, $30 a day, times 7 days, that's $210 a week, times that by 4 weeks a month, that's $840 a month, Times that by 12 months, that's about 10,000 roughly. It's about 8,400 every 10 months. So you're giving about 9 grand, 10 grand to 11 grand a year to big tobacco. Now let's say in 4 years, we're talking about 50 grand. That would have started a small business. That would get you off your feet. That would start an empire for your family, but it's not, because it's going to the same people. And what they're gonna do, they're gonna collect all that money and they're gonna turn around and say, yeah, we're gonna be nice to you. We will give you the money back at 10% interest. If you win or lose, we don't care if your business fails, as long as we get our 10% interest. And so we're working to be slaves to their addictions, and then they give us the money back with a big string attached, so they create fake economies, and they say, okay, here's that $1 million we stole from all the people, and we'll give it back to you, but we want 1.1 million. So they've invented a new number because that wealth didn't exist, and the wealth could not be created because they didn't have the opportunity to create it. You're not giving them resources to create wealth. You're giving them a bit more money, but as the rich get richer, more of the money is in the center. We're fighting for less and less money in the pool, and as interest is going higher, all that money in the pool is more and more represented by interest. And so now, what is the real wealth? Where is the money? Why do we have so much disparity? Why do we have so much problems where we can't even have enough money to give to the Albertans who are suffering after the oil decline? But we have cigarette companies that are making billions, trillions of dollars. You know, like the whole disparity, the whole way that this thing has been created and orchestrated is disgusting. And I think it's time that we as an industry do our part to unravel this mess, or as much as we can. You know, I'm fairly certain that it's not going to be very long before we have some cease and desist at our door saying that, you know, we're bordering on the edge of slander. Or maybe they'll put us in so many lawsuits that VanGo would just have a trouble time fighting big tobacco in court. So they use their money to bully everybody until they shut themselves up.
And it doesn't matter if they win. They don't need to win. They just need to push it off.
That's it.
They're so big, they'll just...
And the addictions. They're going to know that they can rely on addiction. And so as long as they can get people addicted, nobody cares what happens in court. Nobody cares what happens in the government. As long as the addictions stand, the money will flow. They buy back old stock, mix it in with the new shit, and re-roll it and send it out again. I mean, like, this is such a disgusting scam. Like, we're getting screwed over. You know, we have our problems here. Our PM just went and signed a deal that he opens the borders to everybody. You know, like, at the end of the day, who actually controls the world? Where is the control going to? So the governments don't really control the laws. They don't even control the borders anymore. They don't control the money. There's something fishy going on here. You know, I think it's time we woke up.
The government, you know, they're supposed to be helping us. They're supposed to be looking out for us. But these tobacco companies just spend the millions and, you know, they start lobbying. And lobbying is a very, you know, very well known. It's an agreed upon thing. And they're allowed to do this. Now, all this money has been, you know, slowly going down. So slowly this money they've been putting into lobbying went down. Well, on the other side, the cessation product lobbying went up. So the cessation products fall under the pharma category. So now they're a bit safe. So pharma lobbying actually is very funny when you look at these graphs. The tobacco lobbying goes like that, and the pharma lobbying goes like that. So then you're like, okay, so obviously there's some hand in this because it's the same money, it's the same company, the same people working together, so this money just kind of moves. So now in Europe, GSK is lobbying for chemical nicotine, a monopoly on chemical nicotine. They want rights to it. So when you come to this, first of all, that would screw the whole vaping industry. If they get
On a side note, we will be doing an episode just on GSK, the biggest scam of a pharmaceutical company responsible for buying babies in South America. That is literally one of the topics we'll cover, but they were responsible. You can search it online, this is public knowledge. 15,000 babies were killed during their tests. They were asked to give a fine, not much, maybe a couple $100 million, for a company that does billions. So they look at it like we just bought 15,000 babies for 200 grand. Anyways,
they've put a price on human life, and now they're gonna just switch you to the next addiction. The nicotine never came out, right? It's just moving you to a different cessation, and psychologically, there's factual things that show that human minds work on habit. The real way to cessate someone is to give them a new habit to replace it. So you have, you know, healthy habits. You know, you could make kind of a social kind of enterprise, or even, you know, AA actually respect AA a lot because Alcoholics Anonymous, at least, they bring people together who are going through problems.
I mean, it's very obvious, like, you know, you look at these support groups, why are they strong? Because they understand the fact that they're strong together. If we as a community, if the Canadians really got together, banded together and said enough is enough, we want a government that respects us. We want a government that cares about the health of the public, not the health of their pockets. Why is the scum allowed to come in? If tomorrow cocaine became legal, is it okay just because it's legal? Just because they're allowed to be out there peddling their opiates, which in a way it's legal because they have opiates that they hook everybody onto. So this goes into the further scam. You know what I mean? Like, tobacco is one part of this bigger scam. If you look on that day, in 1911, when they had the antitrust the trials, American Oil Company was in that day. In that same day, American Oil was split, and as well as the tobacco. And over the next 100 years, interesting enough, what did American Oil Company turn into? They turned into, slowly, they were split, and they came back together under the banner of Exxon. Everyone knows about Exxon. And now, isn't this interesting? So when we really look at, like, start looking into the history, and you start looking into the roots of all this stuff, where is it coming from, and why has it gone unnoticed for so long? Why was it Nazi Germany who started the first anti-smoking campaigns? You know, I mean, like, all these things are a little bit fishy. Why have we not heard anything? Like, 1950s was the American Journal saying that, no, this is wrong. Why was it not till 1997 when the MSA came out? I think we really got to look deeper at, like, what is going on? Why is Trudeau out there opening our borders up? Why are all these things happening?
And we're already, like, housing problems, you know, you see all this, you know, international investment, we're already getting screwed over in our everyday lives. You know, you talk to someone about a mortgage in Vancouver, they, like, laugh. They're like, yeah, that's not even something you're gonna think about. What are you gonna do? You pay $1 million for an apartment worth $100,000 anywhere else? Because, you know, the government didn't support us because they wanted these other investors to bring tax money. You know what? All right, they bring in the tax money, but did we get any of that tax money?
It's all short term, you know, and when you really look at the true objectives, like, in reality, if you have a company and there's 100 employees, is there any value of only 2 employees doing the contributions and every single one of them doing nothing? No, and that's what we've turned humanity into. We've got 8 billion people ready to contribute to humanity, ready to further humankind, but they're not there. They're not furthering humankind. They're stuck in their addictions. They're stuck doing their same things, and we're all just there treading water to keep giving money to the same people. And then they give us back some of the money, but we don't get all of it, and it comes with a big price tag, and if we play into this game, we're screwed. So we get addicted, we get our money as loans, so that we're slaves to them, both financially and physically, because we're addicted, or we're addicted to the sugar that they fill us with. They're addicted to the media that they push out. We're addicted to all the garbage, different substances that they've given us, and they use media to push it. You look at all the major media outlets, for years and years they've had cigarettes, product placement, for the last decades and decades.
1900s, the first black and white films actually were a lot based off smoking, and then they would use it to create background effects. So you'd think, you know, if you light a bush on fire, wouldn't that make smoke? Or they probably had something else, but tobacco and cigarettes were used to create these hazy atmospheres. Why, out of all things, you guys managed to make this crazy cigarette machines. You're now in the age of industrialization. Why is Hollywood going to a cigarette?
Think of the numbers, and like, even like the sad thing is, like, think of the numbers that we can't see. It comes back to the unquantifiable costs. We can't even see how much damage they've done to society over the last couple 100 years. So anyways, we'll leave you with that. Thank you guys for joining today. If you guys missed any part, of course, it will be on our page. And shoot us your comments. Let us know what you think about these topics, your experiences with tobacco, people that you've seen die. And yeah, I mean, thank you guys for coming.
I hope you guys actually, you know, took in a lot of our content. There was a lot of, you know, seems like, you know, crazy, you know, history that you're hearing about now. And it's like, well, oh, if I heard this for the first time here, how come I never heard about it? Well, even when you do your research, it's pretty hard to find what you want, because who's paying for the most pay-per-clicks? Who's actually, you know, controlling what we feel is
Where is
ours?
the truth? Alright guys, take care. We'll see you guys next week.